The news that attracted a lot of attention today was that Britain has agreed that Ukraine should start producing Storm Shadow missiles. It's licensed production. It's not actually as dramatic as that. The fact is that Ukraine and France agreed and announced last week that they would start production in Ukraine of Storm Shadow missiles. But because they have British components in them, we have to agree it. And of course, we agreed it. So that's a fair idea. This is the Storm Shadow. It's a big, heavy missile. It's got a pretty good warhead. It's designed for penetrating underground areas or fixed sites, so it can burrow into a command site or an ammunition dump or a radar station, whatever it might be. And it can do a lot of damage behind the front lines. That's what it's designed for. That's what it can do. We shouldn't get too excited about this because the Ukrainians will produce it themselves, but probably it'll be next year, at least, before they have sufficient numbers that will make any sort of difference. And there's another couple of limitations we ought to be aware of. One is that when Storm Shadow flies, and certainly when it's flown in Ukraine in the past, it flies normally with a MALD missile, and that is the miniature air-launched decoy. And the MALD missile is a very clever little thing. It can make itself look like several aircraft to a radar operator or many other missiles or a big heavy cruise missile. It can overwhelm radar defenses. It can attract attacks onto itself. It can cut holes in a defense system that the Storm Shadow can then go through. This, of course, is an American missile made by Raytheon. There is a European version being developed called Spear. Maybe that will be ready by next year, we'll see. But it's one of the uncertainties of the future of Storm Shadow as a European-only system. The other limitation is the fact that Storm Shadow is so clever because it's terrain following. It actually gets low down and it follows the terrain. But the point is the terrain changes all the time. It changes with the seasons. It certainly changes when there's snow on the ground. And so in order to use the navigational cleverness of Storm Shadow properly, you have to have accurate, up-to-date versions of what the terrain looks like. Not something that was accurate 3 or 4 weeks ago, something that is accurate as of yesterday and today. And that information, what the terrain really looks like in the area you're interested in, you can only get from American satellite surveillance and American intelligence sources. And that's the point. Only the Americans can provide the terrain information that Storm Shadow needs to be really accurate. And that's probably a long-term issue which somehow they're going to have to work their way through. However, Storm Shadow will appear at some point in the future. But meanwhile, the Ukrainians have got to get through the next 12 months before anything like Storm Shadow and some of the other systems will come online. And in that time, they are desperately short of Patriot air defense systems because they're subject to ballistic missile attack from Russia. And not only that, being the Ukrainians, of course, they've got their own system under development, the Freya system, based on the FP7, the Firepoint 7, which is a missile every bit as good as Patriot and about a fifth of the cost. But they don't yet have all the ground-based parts of it. They don't have all of the system together because the whole thing only works when it's a proper system. But they're working with France and Germany and Italy to develop that. The Freya system will be Europe's Patriot system as applied to Ukraine. It'll probably be pretty good. It'll certainly be a great deal cheaper, but it won't be around until next year, maybe even the year after. And somehow, Ukraine have got to get through from now until then. So, where are we with Storm Shadow? Well, Storm Shadow has a range of about 150 miles, say 230 odd kilometers. So it's very good at hitting areas behind the battle space, the logistical footprint, the critical issues, critical areas, which the Russians will want to try to preserve. So Storm Shadow will be good in that respect for the Ukrainians. But there's something much more important here, co-production, allowing the Ukrainians to produce what we also do in Europe and producing it with them. Already, European companies are working with Ukraine to produce howitzers, glide bombs, the Aster-30 missiles, the FP7 of the Freya system that I just mentioned, and now Storm Shadow. And what that represents is the fact that the Ukrainians are taken very seriously. They are the most successful army in Europe. They're the best army in Europe at the moment. And they've got the best defense industrial base of any European country. The most innovative, the fastest to develop things because they're at war. And so the Europeans are not only helping Ukraine develop that, but they're developing it for their own sake because we want those transformative systems as well. And that's the real importance of today's meeting. It's co-production more than the actual missile itself. All of these meetings feature what's called in diplomacy a family photograph. They all line up on fixed positions. They have a photograph, and that's the official photograph of the event. And there'll be one from this meeting. But this is the spontaneous family photograph, which I prefer, because this is a family photograph which shows that Zelensky is very much a member of the family, and they all look like friends. And the fact is, the Ukrainians and Zelensky are friendly members of the West European family. And that's what's really important about this. Before 2014, President Putin had a pretty compliant Ukraine. It leant towards Moscow in more or less all affairs. But in 2013, 2014, he became worried that it was leaning too much towards the European Union. So he manipulated a crisis, he started a war, and as a result of that, he's been on a different track ever since. And 12 years later, and one war later, here we are now. The fact is, Ukraine is not just a member of the European family, it is the most militarized, the most innovative, the most militarily important member of the family of all amongst the Europeans. How do you like that, Mr. Putin?